Neil, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Having read Conversations with God some time ago and God Talk more recently, I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes today.
Well, I am too. Uh, I can tell you where it's going to go. Maar ik zie meteen de kwaad. Wat voor bedoelen? Dus ik zei de derde. Wasakata boom boom.
Well, I don't think I have any further questions after that. You've summed it up so succinctly. Neil, the question that I usually start this with is the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Yes, there is really. What would it take for humanity to get to really hear and to embrace God's most important message? That's the question that I've been looking at for quite some time.
And from your explorations of that question, Neil, can you lay out what you believe God's most important message for humanity is to hear?
Oh, I can give it to you in 5 words.
I'd love
You
to hear.
want me? You want
Yes,
me to give it
please.
to you?
I'm waiting. I'm waiting with bated breath.
God's most important message to the world in 5 words. You've got me all wrong.
Right.
You see, most of the world thinks, most of the people in the world who actually believe in God, now not everybody does, but statistics have shown that 80% of the people on the planet do believe in some kind of higher power. Sociologists have taken surveys in most of the countries of the world in the past few years, asking a single question. It was a one-question survey. Do you believe in a higher power? And 8 out of 10 people have said, yeah, they do. There's more going on here than meets the eye. But there's not an agreement about that higher power. What is it? What does it want? How do we interact with it? How does it interact with us? So God's most important message to the world is, you got me all wrong. And when I explored that with God, she said, Neil, the problem is people think that God's relationship with humanity is transactional. We think that, it's like a trade deal between nations. You give me what I need, I'll give you what you want. You don't give me what I want, you don't get what you want. And because we think that that's how God works with us, and by the way, the reason we think that is that most of the world's religions teach that. Not every religion, to be fair, but the majority of religions teach of a God who says, here are the rules, here's what you need to do, here's what I need to have you not do. If you obey the rules, you get to, when you leave, when your time on earth is over, you get to rejoin me in heaven. But if you don't obey the rules, then you don't get what you want. We have a transaction here. Now, the challenge with that is that it causes us to think that because God is the source of love, that love is transactional. And we wind up creating transactional relationships with each other, with with our spouses, with our family members, with our neighbors across the street, with other nations, with people all around the planet. We create transactional relationships. And but God says, no, you don't understand. My love is pure love. I don't need anything from you in return. I'm not giving you my love because of what you give me. I don't need anything from you. Have you forgotten? I am the highest power. I am whatever you could possibly give me anyway. There's nothing you could give me that I have not created. I am it. So, so I don't need anything from you in order for me to love you. And that's a brand new idea of God. And it tells us that God is not judgmental, not condemning, and not punishing. Now, Mark, that's theologically revolutionary.
Mm.
That statement upends most of the world's religions because the largest number of the world's religions, oh, and by the way, how many religions are there on the earth right now?
I'd say in the thousands, or how many is it?
Oh, you really think it's in the thousands?
With all different sub sets of let's say Christianity and whatever else.
Mark, you're right.
Ah, there we go.
There are 4,223 religions on the face of the earth right now. And most, not all, but most of those religions teach of a God who, in fact, judges us, condemns us, if we are judged to have not been, doing what we're supposed to be doing, uh, and uh, and punishes us if we have not behaved appropriately. So, what is appropriate? Well, that depends on which God you're talking to. You're talking to the Christian God, you're talking to the Jewish God, you're talking to the Muslim God, you're talking to the Buddhist God. Of course, Buddhism is not even a religion, it's a philosophy, but you're talking to the Hindu God. Which God are you talking to? Because, every religion has a different set of rules that God says you have to obey. As an example, I was born as a Roman Catholic. I was born into a Roman Catholic family. And so they sent me to a Catholic school, like all good Catholic families did in those days. So I was, in grade school, I was being told all about God. I was, 9 years old, 10 years old. I'm hearing all these pieces of information about God. And I was being told about mortal sin and venial sin. But what I came to understand is that unless you're a Christian, you don't go to heaven. All those who don't believe in Jesus are not taken back into heaven when they die. That means that millions, actually billions of the world's people, 1.3 billion of the world's people are Muslim. And they're apparently, according to the Christian theology, they're going to hell. To say nothing about the Jewish population, the Hindu population, and all those other 4,000 religions I've mentioned. So, but we believe in a God who says, oh, no, 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 there's only one doorway, and if you don't take the right doorway, you're out. And that's only one of the rules. Many religions actually tell us what you can eat, what you can wear, the clothes you can wear. If my understanding is correct, I could have this wrong, but my understanding is correct. The Muslim religion tells us that women must wear a hijab. That's a garment that covers their head and their entire body whenever they leave the house. And because they're not supposed to allow the shape of their body and their hair to be seen in public. And if they don't wear that kind of covering whenever they leave the house, all of their life, if they refuse to do it or they violate the rule, God will punish them. And when I was one more example of that, being told even what you can eat. I was told, as a Catholic, I was told you couldn't eat meat on Fridays. We had what was called meatless Fridays, and I couldn't understand why. I finally asked a priest why. I don't understand why can't we have meat on Friday? Because Jesus died on Friday. It's called Good Friday, and so we have to pay the penalty. And I said, let me see if I understand it. We are paying the penalty for Jesus's death 2,000 years later, because this is what God requires. This is the kind of God you want me to say I should be in love with? Wow. So God's important message to the world is you got me all wrong. It's not how it really is with me. And I understand it's theologically revolutionary. It upsets the apple cart, but you got me all wrong. My love is pure love. It needs, requires, expects, and demands nothing in return. You guys can't even love the person on the pillow next to you that way.
Yeah. That was uh, that was an image from the book that came to mind just there as you were saying that exact sentiment that pe we can't even apparently seem to love our spouse or our partner next to us on the bed that way. Where do you think we've How do you think even, because when you say it, I know you're saying this is revolutionary, but the idea that that we would associate anything other than pure love with God, outside of the context of this is how the world is right now, and outside of the context that this is how religions are perceived or structured, it is almost remarkable that the idea that God would just engage in a sense of pure love, and for that to be revolutionary, it sounds quite counterintuitive to any kind of perceived or felt experience sense of God rather than a learned sense of God.
Yes, that's the irony of it, Mark, because what religion has done, what our human culture has done around the idea of God is we've taken two aspects, two emotions, fear and love, and tried to mix them together.
Hmm.
In other words, we've created a God that we're afraid of. Again, to talk about my upbringing, I was told as a child that it was good to be a God-fearing man.
Yes.
So I'm supposed to be afraid of the person I'm supposed to be loving. I'm supposed to be afraid of the being that I'm supposed to be loving. So, and if I don't, if I'm not, loving that person because, I'm so afraid of that person, then I will find out, sure enough, that I should have been afraid because I'll be sent to a place that's not going to be very nice, and not for a little while, even though in terms of eternity, considered in proportional dynamics, in terms of eternity, my lifespan is about 1 second compared to 1,000 years. But what I did in my limited lifespan here on Earth is going to put me in unbelievable torture and suffering in the fires of hell for eternity. And this is the God I want to love? No, really what I want to say is, what the hell kind of God are you? You know, I we I don't understand. Help me understand. And God said, okay, I'll help you understand. It's really very simple. You've got me all wrong.
From your perspective, Neil, and I'm aware of what you recount in both of these, conversations with God originally in God Talk of a moment of writing that letter to God or with a list of grievances as such. And was that the turning point, or was there something before that where you not only started to question this notion of God, but where you weren't fully buying into the idea that you would fear this God? Like I'm raised a Catholic, I'm born in Ireland, naturally enough, I was raised a Catholic as well. And that sentiment that, we are to fear God or God may punish you or there may be damnation, all of these kind of things. From your perspective, even to get to a point where you were willing to question God, through something, through a written letter, or even just before that, was there something occurring where you wanted to understand more, or that there was too much kind of incoherence between what your ideas of God should be and what they were presented to you as?
Yes, as a young man, when I was around 17, I really wanted to become a priest. I thought that my calling was to be in the priesthood because I was, just really smitten with the whole idea of God and godliness and divinity and man's uh, place in all of that. And so I saw myself as a member of the priesthood. But as I began to, move closer into that possibility, of course, I was then really studying and looking closely at it and asking questions about the Catholic doctrine, the dogma of the church, and I began to question, how can these things be true? How I didn't understand. For instance, just to give you a perfect example, I was told that I asked some Catholic theologians in my archdiocese, um, what's a mortal sin? Give me an example of a mortal sin. And the theologian said, oh, I can give you a perfect example. Missing Mass on Sunday. I said, wait a minute. No, no, I asked you for a mortal sin, like, killing someone or stealing someone's life savings or whatever. No, no, he said, mortal sin. It's a mortal sin if you miss Mass on Sunday without a good excuse. Now, if you're caring for a sick parent or a child or whatever, fair enough. Or if you have to work on Sunday to support your family, okay. But if you just decide to go play golf one Sunday morning, just because, a friend you haven't seen in 20 years knocks on your door and surprises you with a reunion and says, let's go play golf. And you say, oh my God, I haven't seen you in 20 years. Yeah, let's go. And so you go to play golf. If you don't go to confession and confess that sin and receive absolution, even if you're on your way to the confessional and you get hit by a car on your way to church and you couldn't go to confession, you will be sent to hell. Everlasting damnation for missing Mass one Sunday in your life. By the way, folks, if you're watching, if you think I'm making this up, check Roman Catholic theology. I'm not making this up. This is the doctrine of the church. So when I began hearing things like that, I stepped back and I said, no, no, wait. Somebody must have something wrong. This can't be the God we're talking about. We can't, I just don't get it. And so I turned into, a kind of a miniature Galileo. He was in deep trouble, of course, in 1623 when he said that the earth revolved around the sun, because the church taught that the sun revolved around the earth. And that was the church's teaching. It was the church's doctrine. And so they called Galileo a heretic because the church taught that humanity and humanity's home, the earth, was the greatest creation of God, God's greatest creation. Therefore, the sun revolved around the earth. The earth was the center of the universe. When Galileo proved scientifically that that wasn't true, they excommunicated him. And they put him under house arrest for the rest of his life. Poor man died in an insane asylum but he never gave up his truth. He was an idea hero. He said, I'm sorry, the earth revolves around the sun. You guys have got it wrong. Now, it took the church 364 years to reverse its excommunication of Galileo, to finally admit 364 years later, the church came out and said, okay, fair enough, we were wrong. And they allowed us to how Galileo was no longer excommunicated. But this is the kind of nonsense, and I don't mean to be Catholic bashing, because we could go into this kind of stuff with virtually any one of the 4,000 religions on the earth. So, yeah, to answer your question directly, when I was a young man, around 17 or 18, I decided, you know what? I can't go into the priesthood. I cannot join the clergy of a church that teaches these kinds of doctrines. So I had to step away. And then I began to really embark on a close study of other of the world's religions. I looked at Judaism. I looked at the Muslim faith. I did look at the Hindu faith tradition. I looked at many, many approaches to this higher power that we call God, Allah, Brahman, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever word we want to use to refer to this supreme being. And that brought me into a very fascinating experience, hearing what all these other religions were saying about the higher power, each with their own point of view and their own ideas of what she wants.
For you, just out of interest, did that questioning of religion ever question a sense of God itself, or did was there continuously a kind of a sense that, okay, I believe in God, I just don't believe in these presentations of God?
Yes, that's where I was. Yeah, I never lost my belief in God. I never lost my faith that there is something more going on here than meets the eye. There is a higher power. And I never let go of my belief, my knowing about that. I just have known that inside of my body all my life. There is a higher power. But the disagreements about what it is, how it works, what it wants, what it does when it doesn't get what it wants, all of that, it's, Bill put it perfectly. Bill, I thought said it wonderfully. He wrote a play called Hamlet, and in the Hamlet, he had one of the characters saying, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." So,
For you, this moment then of actually considering the possibility that one could converse with God, like that this wasn't a
now
one-way
that
street,
that that possibility I never really considered.
right?
That happened quite by accident. I never even thought that one could converse with God. I mean, I realize, of course, that throughout history we have proclaimed that some people have had the ability to receive communications from the divine. We have, Moses declared that he was talked to God and was given the Ten Commandments, and people believed him. Jesus said he talks to God and is part of God, and people believed him. And others as well, both male and female, through the centuries. Catherine of Genoa, Julian of Norwich, Teresa of Avila, men and women throughout the centuries have claimed, no, I had a direct revelation from the divine. And we've believed them. So, but the idea that the average person, I mean, God might even talk to Neale when you think about it, because he's pretty special. But God's not going to talk to Mark. I mean, come on, Mark. God says, no, I don't have time for Mark. Don't be silly. So to be put humor aside for just a moment, it never occurred to me uh, that I could talk directly to God. That came about as a result of an exasperating point in my life when everything was going wrong. And I sat down and wrote a very angry letter to God. It was 4:30 in the morning, 4:23 to be exact. I remember it vividly. And I sat down in my little one-room apartment and wrote a very angry letter to God. Just, I don't know what I thought I was doing, but I was just getting my feelings out.
Yeah.
So I just wrote a letter on a tablet. Dear God, what does it take to make life work? What have I done to deserve a life of such endless struggle? Tell me the rules. I'll play this stupid game. Just tell me the rules. And after you tell me the rules, don't change them from person to person or religion to religion or place to place. one kind of rule in Russia, another kind of rule in Japan, different kind of rule in Argentina, a third rule in Oklahoma, a different kind of rule in Pittsburgh. Wait a minute. You mean there even are rules in Pittsburgh? No. So, so I was like, so I wrote this angry letter. And in the middle of my writing this letter, I heard a voice in my mind, heard a voice in my head saying, Neale, do you really want answers to all of these questions? Or are you just venting? And I said, well, I am venting, but if you've got answers, I'd sure as hell like to know what they are. And the voice said, you are sure as hell about a lot of things. But wouldn't you rather be sure as heaven? And I was just sitting there. It's 4:30 in the morning. I said, okay, I write down on the tablet. What's that supposed to mean? God said, okay, take this down. And I got answers to all the questions that I was asking, which brought up other questions, of course, which brought up other answers, which brought up other questions, which brought up other answers. And before I knew it, I was involved in an on-paper dialogue.
What was that sensation like to go from, you're saying you're angry and, maybe even just aware that you're just getting feeling, expressing and getting out feelings to then suddenly being met with a response from the divine. Like
The
with,
feeling was a joyful tears. I remember I remember vividly tears flowing down my face. Not at first, not in the very first minute, but
yeah.
after a few hours of this, and this went on, by the way, for hours. And the tears were flowing down my face because I was filled with warmth, joy, peace, awareness, sensitivity, serenity, compassion for myself and for all the world, and love. So it transformed not just my mood, but my entire personality.
Did you ever have a glimpse of that kind of experience before this? Like was because the words you're mentioning here, peace, awareness, serenity, compassion, and the way you even just said love, I assume you're even relaying that even to the sense of pure love, like for all this to be washing over one's body or one's experience all at once, like was this and just the knowing of it too by the sounds of it. Like, was this a lot to hold, or was there just peacefulness within? This is the occurrence that my present experience is, if you get me.
Yes, the answer is yes to both questions.
Right.
It was a lot to hold, and it was just what's occurring. So it's not either or, it was both and.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just found myself really looking at the whole experience and deciding, what do I want to make of this? What in the world is going on here? So I thought, well, I've got God on the line. I might as well ask every question I ever had. I mean, about everything, about sex, about relationships, about right livelihood, about, the kind of work one should do, about diet. I mean, about parenting. I asked every question I could imagine. I thought, and the answers that I got were frankly astonishing to me. Many of the answers directly contradicted what I had been taught about God in my life and what I had picked up from my culture. So that's what made me know that I wasn't making it all up in my mind, because I would never have come up with what I was being told in this dialogue For instance, to give you one example, one
Yeah,
vivid
please.
example, I'll never forget when I was told there's no such thing as right and wrong. And I said, no, 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 wait a minute. No, now you're making me crazy. What do you mean? Of course there's right and wrong. Even God says that. God says, no, there's only what works and what does not work, given what it is you're trying to do.
Hmm.
So I said, wow, that's it. That's a totally dramatically different point of view. I never heard of such an idea. I said, certainly it's wrong to use physical force to hurt somebody, to say nothing about killing them. That can't be right. That's got to be wrong. God said, really? Doesn't it depend on what it is you're trying to do? What if you're trying to save your wife from being murdered? What if somebody's attacking your wife right in front of you? Would you use physical force, even killing force if you had to stop your wife from being attacked? I said, well, that's a different example. God said, no, it's the very point I was making. There's no such thing as right and wrong. There's only what works or what does not work, given what it is you're trying to do. So, in one instance, using physical force, damaging or injuring another person, maybe even killing them, would not be wrong, unless it is, depending on what it is you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. So humanity faces an extraordinary moral dilemma. What makes something right and what makes something wrong? What are we doing right now in Gaza? What are we doing right now in Ukraine? What have we been doing all over this world? Folks, we've had armed conflict on this planet for all but 5% of recorded history. I didn't make that number up. That's truth. So at some point, we're going to wake up and say, you know what? This is not wrong from a moral point of view. It's simply not functional. It doesn't work. If we say what we want is a world of peace, joy, and love, it doesn't work to kill thousands of people because we can't decide where the borderline is between our two countries. I mean, a geographical disagreement, and we kill 25,000 people? I'm sorry?
For you, in just even hearing the idea of right and wrong, and because there's so many things you've even mentioned through the course of this conversation already that we've got such fixed conditioned beliefs in us around what could be right or wrong or what would even make sense, that I think if you step back from them and if you detach somewhat from a conditioning or a cultural ideas, it almost sounds absurd. But for you to be hearing these things, considering that this was your first exposure to it, and I know earlier you just kind of said, "Oh God, what are you telling me? There's no right or wrong." What was the sensation like of almost what I could imagine, just the sheer dissonance between your conditioning and probably, I'm assuming as well, maybe the truth of what you felt you were hearing in that point in time?
I was at a place of struggle. I struggled with it, and I thought several things. Number one, I thought, "Ugh, how do I know I'm just not imagining this?
Right.
You know. So I asked God that. How do I know this is not just my imagination? And God said, what makes you think I would stop? at using your imagination to get through to you. Where did Mozart's music come from? Where did Michelangelo's art on the Sistine Chapel ceiling come from? Where did any great creation come from, if not from your imagination? Half the inventive ideas in the world came from somebody's imagination. So what makes you think I wouldn't use your imagination? That doesn't invalidate what you're receiving. So, oh, very, very interesting. But, some of the things you say to me sound too good to be true. To which God replied, sweetheart, if God can't be too good to be true, who the hell can?
But isn't there such a almost like a contradiction between our ideas? One thing I've always found is how limited a scope we have for what life could be or what we could experience in this life versus, the limitations that we put on it. Like even expressions like you just said, they're too good to be true. I know there's a number of expressions you even point to in the book where we just limit what this life can be and then still holding into this wonderful belief that there's a creator that loves us, that has created all of this. And then we have kind of such constraints on what this life could be. Like
Well,
it's
I think that we have those ideas, Mark, based on our experience. Those ideas aren't coming into our mind out of nowhere.
hmm,
Those ideas have come to us because our experience has shown us that there is great limitation with regard to what we can create versus what we are wanting to experience. So, and that's because we haven't learned how to use the laws of metaphysics. People who have learned how to use the laws of metaphysics have very little difficulty creating the outcomes in their life, whether they're really major outcomes or smaller ones, but they create the outcomes in their life that they want to experience. And we call those people when they demonstrate their ability to do that, we call them masters. They've mastered the art of creation. They can produce the outcomes that they most desire. So those are interesting people. But, what would it take for all of us to be able to use the laws of metaphysics in that way? You know,
yeah.
I read a book that really, I have to say, speaking of the laws of metaphysics, I read a book when I was, I don't know, 22, perhaps 23 years old, uh, by a man named Norman Vincent Peale. And he was a Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. He was a Reverend Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. Wrote a book called The Power of Positive Thinking. Unbelievable book. Everybody on the planet should read it. Of course, it sold like 25 million copies. It's one of the great bestsellers of all time. The Power of Positive Thinking. But when I read that book, I decided, you know what? I like this. I'm going to start thinking positively, speaking positively, and acting as if what I'm thinking about and speaking about is my reality or is going to be. So I began to use the principles that Dr. Peale was espousing in that book. And of course, there have been many books since then talking about the exact same kind of thing. Ask and it is given. Marvelous book by Esther and Jerry Hicks. And so, there are many books about, this use of the energetic that God has placed within all of us to generate the realities that we most desire. But the question is, are we going to be that source of our own experience? Or are we going to continue to allow ourselves, both individually and as a collective called humanity, are we going to continue to allow ourselves to be affected and impacted by the world around us in a way that causes us to imagine we have no control over it? So, which of those two scenarios are we going to be? Or as Bill wrote a few years ago, to be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to rise up against a sea of troubles, and by opposing to end them. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come.
From your experience initially of, writing this letter, the ongoing dialogue, just even when you mentioned dreams there and the idea of imagination and God alluding to imagination being why would I leave that? Why would I not use your imagination as a tool? When did you then, how did that evolve for you? Just this notion that God is talking to us all the time. And it may not even just be in the moments where you're deliberately trying to engage in this conversation, or it would be quite as clear when you're having a written dialogue with them. But, signs that you're picking up on, sensations, feelings. Was that something that occurred for yourself, or was this when after you obviously published this book and it went, it became a huge bestseller? Did you start to attract or engage more people where they were telling you of their experiences, or how did that evolve for yourself, just in terms of the variety of the conversations with God?
Evolved for myself in, I think, the first 10 or 12 pages of Conversations with God, book one.
Mm.
It wasn't a process that evolved in me or through me. I was simply told. I asked God in the very early part of my conversation with her, why me? Why in the world would you choose me to talk to? And God said, Neale, I talk to everyone all the time. The question is not to whom am I talking? The question is, who's listening? So from that, I came to understand, oh, God is talking to all of us all the time. Life informs life about life through the process of life itself. But we don't walk around, at least most people don't walk around saying, yeah, I just had a conversation with God. And, I was told that I should do this or do that, or not do this or not do that. Most people don't want to be ridiculed or made fun of, or marginalized. So they say, women's intuition, or it was an epiphany, or no, 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 I had a psychic hit. Last night I had an incredible psychic hit. Or they'll find some other words they can use, you know, a brilliant idea, a fantastic insight, a revelation, but, but they would not call it a conversation with God because our culture has a bias against the notion that God would talk to Mark or the average person. So in order to fight that bias, we receive information from the divine, as you mentioned yourself a minute ago, through feelings, experiences, serendipity, coincidences that occur. God said to me in CWG, she said, Neale, there's no such thing as a coincidence. Nothing happens by coincidence.
There's something quite poignant though about hugely it gives huge hope. First of all, I guess the sense that God is talking to all of us all the time.
Yes,
And
she is.
but there's also there's something very poignant I find that she's speaking with this, and that so few people are listening. Then, like it's almost like a sense of like torment that it's within our field, it's within our capacity, and just whereas a humanity we've gone to either to the extent that we're sleepwalking, to the extent that we're just not paying attention, or that we've reduced our sensitivity to not even just the possibility of it, but just the to notice it really.
Well, I think that the culture has, as I said a minute ago, stepped into a bias. We've created a cultural bias against the idea. So in fact, it goes beyond that. Our religions, getting back to the topic of religions here, most of our religions tell us if you claim that God is talking to you, and God forbid you should claim that God is talking through you, then you're a blasphemer. You're an apostate. You're a heretic. And we will, in certain countries and in certain religions, bring you up on charges. I mean, legally, there are countries in the world where you say that God is talking to me, and this is what he said, and they can take you to a legal system. So, so of course, that's why the largest number of people on the planet, even if they do think that God is talking to us, would not admit it out loud. They would rarely share it with anyone. But you know what? You pointed to the fact that Conversations with God wound up becoming a best-selling book around the planet. I'm not sure. I'm not bragging. I'm just going to make the point. A book doesn't sell 15 million copies in 37 languages unless it reaches an audience that already agrees with its content.
Yeah.
So what happened was the book gave people permission to say to themselves, I knew it. I knew it. I've had this exact same experience.
I love the sense of the truth reminds people of something that they already knew but forgot.
Yes.
And and I love the idea that if, because as you're saying, if it's such a, if we put in air quotes, almost crazy notion, then how is it so fertile, or how is there such a an open receptivity to it? You know, just it kind of one question dovetails into the other. So just I guess one thing around how was it for you then to suddenly start telling people that this is my experience? Because and then the second part of that, I guess, is just even not even a question, but even maybe even to lead into what you're encouraging in God talk. Like let's not be have some idea of decorum or politeness and not talk about God. So just even just from your personal experience of opening up to people in your network of your friends or family, what was that like for you? And I guess moving in then, how do we do this more broadly ourselves?
Well, number one, for me, it was really very easy. I didn't. You see, I should explain to anyone who's listening to this program now. I didn't sit down to write a book. I didn't have my conversations with God in order to produce a book. I never dreamt in a million years that anyone would ever see this exchange in writing that I was having with the divine. I considered that I was having, I don't want to sound, you know, precious about it, but I really did consider that I was having a very personal, private, sacred experience. It didn't even occur to me that anyone else would ever know about it, nor was I prepared to tell anyone about it. But I was told in the dialogue, Neale, you will make of this one day a book. and it will be accessed by many people. And I thought to myself, oh, yeah, right. Yeah. I could just see there's nobody's going to publish a book because a guy in Oregon claims that God is talking to him. It's not going to happen. It's, it's craziness. But wait a minute. This is a way to see whether it really is God talking to me. Because the probability, to say nothing of the possibility, that some legitimate publisher, I mean, I could self-publish, but that some legitimate publishing company would put a book out because some guy claims that God is talking to it, it's not going to happen unless it actually did happen. So the best way to check out what I was told, because I was told in the dialogue, this will become a book accessed by many people. I thought to myself, we'll see about that. So I actually Xeroxed my handwritten notes and sent them to a couple of publishers. 2 weeks later, I got a call. Mr. Walsh, we want to publish your book. I said, you're kidding me. They said, no, it's a wonderful work of fiction. It's about a guy who has an argument with God. It's a terrific, terrific novel. I said, whoa, wait a minute. You're not publishing this book as a book, as a work of fiction. And the publisher on the other end of the phone said, Mr. Walsh, are you trying to tell me you think this actually happened to you? I said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm telling you. And I sent it to you because I was told in the dialogue that this will be published and accessed by many people. So the publisher said, well, okay, we can put it out as a nonfiction book, but it's not going to find 500 readers because the average person is not going to say, I got to read this book. This guy's talking to God. This is really important. No, they're going to dismiss the book out of hand. They're not going to read it. So, we'll be lucky if we find 500 readers, but we like the material well enough. We'll put it out as a nonfiction book. And he was right. That publisher was absolutely right. The book didn't find 500 readers. It found 15 million. As I said a minute ago, in 37 languages. I mean, the book is being read in Romania, in Russia, in China. Was invited to go speak in China by the government, by the way, not by some private organization. The
What did
government of China invited me to come and speak.
what did that do to your sense of being or just experience of life? And I know that's a bit vague, but to go through this experience, to start this dialogue, to say that you were experiencing, you know, difficulties at the time when this dialogue started in your life, like you were angry.
To put it mildly.
Yeah, yeah. And then I didn't want to speak on your behalf. But the sense then that he says it's going, she says it's going to be published. You submit even just handwritten notes, and this happens. Like what does that do to your sense of perception in life, your sense of being, possibility? Like was it surreal as it
Well, was it
occurred?
surreal? What was it surreal? Let me see. Let me see if he's asking if this was surreal.
I
Yeah. Okay.
I
Okay. Right. Yeah.
I I
The
mean
answer is hello. Of
no,
course it was.
but I mean as in the sense of you're physically reacting in a sense of peace, compassion, serenity. Like was this was that
Well, that was
surrealness
a
coupled? I know, but I
yeah,
just
that
mean I know that was part of the experience, but I just mean was that coupled with a sense of I was told this, so I'm not as perplexed by this, or was it just the complete surreal nature of it?
somewhere in the middle, actually.
Right.
It wasn't either or, it was somewhere in the middle. I was a bit surprised when what happened with the book, but at the same time, I was kind of not surprised because I had been told directly.
Yeah.
So I kind of had both experiences at the same time. Surprised, but not surprised. Like, like when somebody throws you a surprise birthday party for your 80th birthday. I had a surprise birthday party for my 80th birthday. I was surprised, but not surprised.
Right.
Okay, so my family got together and threw a so-called surprise party. So I was surprised, except I wasn't surprised. So it was kind of like that. I had both experiences at the same time.
You mentioned just the way the world is going, some of the almost the seemingly contradictory ideas we hold, the consequences of many of the ideas we hold around even peace and conflict and war. And what I was struck in reading God Talk, it brought up something for me when we're talking about the problems in the world, even what we're doing to the environment and so many other things. I'm so surprised at how rarely love is mentioned. And I don't mean this in some dreamy, deluded sense, but how little we tap into the actual sense of love changing something in the world. And then just with the way the book goes as well, with ending it or with it focusing more on conversations with God, like conversations about God with other people. I don't want to sound naive in this, but to me, a future that is different from what we're presently experiencing without a sense of pure love or without even more of an open dialogue around, well, what is this creative force? What is this thing that we're a part of? To me, that would almost seem a little bit naive to think that we could just think our way out of our present thinking to think our way out of our present situation. Just curious from your perspective, what is that? What was that inclination of yours to suggest, okay, look, let's let's stop being polite about religion. Like, what do we actually feel? What are our experiences of God? What are our experience of conversing with God? When did when did that become a something that you thought was like, when did you have a stronger inclination that that needed to be suggested?
I think what you're asking me in so many words is when, Neil, when did this become your mission in life?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and it became my mission when I began receiving, and I'll never forget the first batch of letters. I had in the back of the book, I think, uh, a post office box where I was receiving mail. I invited people if they wanted to write to me, they could write me at that post office box. And I thought, I may get a few letters from people. And then the postmaster called me and he said, Mr. Walsh, we need you to get a bigger box. We need you to get a corporate size box, like for, like our corporations have, because the mail is falling out of the box. We can't get it all in. So I went to the post office, and sure enough, there were hundreds of letters. And most of the letters were saying essentially the same thing. This book is changing my life for the better. This book has brought me incredible benefit. This book has given me a sense of peace, larger understanding, a deeper awareness, a greater willingness to step into the essential essence of who I really am. Because, of course, the Conversations with God message is that we are all individuations of divinity, that there's no separation between us and God, that God and we are one. So when I got that kind of response, I thought, oh, I can't let this drop here. Obviously, this is something that has a chance to produce an even larger outcome. So I created, a foundation, a nonprofit foundation, the Conversations with God Foundation. And I began to do what I could do to make sure that the message continued to be placed into the public sphere. And of course, they called in New York. They called me from New York, I should say, saying, uh, do you have any sisters like that at home? Because, is your conversation concluded? I said, well, no, the experience I'm having continually. And the New York publishers, because it wasn't published by a company in New York, it was published by a very small company in Virginia, in the United States. But that company sold the book to a major publisher in New York. Um, and then they made a movie out of it. They made a movie out of the whole experience that I had. Hollywood came to my door, and a Hollywood producer asked me if he could make a movie of my life, of that portion of my life that we're talking about here. So that became my mission then. I thought, okay, I'm going to spend the rest of my life bringing this message to as many people as I possibly can, in as many ways as I possibly can. Mark, that was 30 years ago. As it happens, just by coincidence, we are producing this program right now on the 30th anniversary, the 30th anniversary month of the publication of the first book. It was published in 1995, 30 years ago, in May of 1995. So we celebrate our 30th anniversary, and I will continue with this mission as long as I'm here. And now we have many people at the foundation, at our nonprofit foundation, who will pick up the mission when I leave the planet. I want to make sure that I don't turn it into a religion. We have no intention of having this becoming, our 4,221st religion. Excuse me. So we're not going to turn it into a religion or let it become another faith tradition. But it's just, a point of view,
Yeah.
an idea. And people can agree with it or disagree with it. It's as simple as that. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything, but I am committed to sharing what my experience has been from the for what it's worth department.
Just from so many of the things that you've been sharing in terms of like just the moment even when you write this letter, you start to engage your experience with God. You talk even around then just what we've got wrong, what God has said, you've got me all wrong. The idea that pure love isn't typically what the major religions are sharing. You know, you talk about even just this incredible experience where all you felt was peace, awareness, serenity, and compassion. And you talked obviously about this, going through with the idea of publishing this and just seeing how receptive the rest of the world was even to this book coming out. And what that almost does to you then in providing yourself with a mission for this life. And so many of the things that you've shared along the way around this life that you've been experiencing. Just really intrigued to hear you answer the question, Neale, of what is a good life for you.
A good life for me is a life filled with moments in which I live up to the messages that I've shared. A life in which I see other people as one with me. A life in which I express and experience pure love with them and for them, even those with whom I disagree. A good life for me is a life in which I can disagree agreeably and stand as an example to the degree that I can. I have my weaknesses and my faults and my foibles like anybody else. But a good life for me is a life in which I can step into the message and say, guys, it's not that difficult. Let's make this work. Let's be here for and with each other in a brand new way. Let's create humanity in a brand new way.
You said something really beautiful in the book, Neil, around the soul's role in a good life. And it was, go where your soul seeks to go, experience what your soul seeks to experience, and express what your soul seeks to express. This does not mean denying yourself the good life, but this is ultimately the path towards it. Given all that you've shared, and just the remarkable story and experience that is within it, I'm just so grateful for your time today and joining us on the What is a Good Life podcast.
Thank you, Mark. It was generous of you to ask me to join you here, and I appreciate the opportunity because it's one more moment in which I can share with others what it is I've been given to share.